Hi. My name's Ethan Thampy. Obviously, you know that if you're watching this YouTube channel. I'm a lobbyist in Missouri working on cryptocurrency and Bitcoin policy. And I wanted to talk today about the Senate Bill 100, which was recently passed by the Missouri Senate and is in front of the Missouri House. And the interesting development that happened during Senate debate. So, Senate Bill 100 allows for gold and silver as legal tender in Missouri. So, any public entity would have to accept gold and silver for payment of debts or whatever. And also, Missouri would be mandated to keep, I think, up to 1% of reserves of its state reserves in gold and silver. So, it's a bill actually that I think my old friend, former state representative Paul Kurtman filed 8 or 9 years ago, and got some attention then. But this in the last few years, State Senator Bill Eigel, who's a Republican from St. Charles, has really taken up the issue, and this year it seems to have moved pretty fast. And so on February 9 was when the bill got perfected in the Senate, and something really interesting happened that I actually was not expecting. I'd been talking about issues surrounding Bitcoin policy and cryptocurrency in the legislature, but um, during the debate on Senate Bill 100, State Senator Rick Brattin, who's a Republican from Cass County in western Missouri, added an amendment that I thought was really interesting and really worthwhile. And what he did was he inserted language in the bill um, that prevents public entities from mandating use of a digital currency. So this really caught my attention because it is something that I had been really thinking about vis-a-vis the prospective introduction in the United States of a Federal Reserve digital currency. So for those of you who don't know what a central bank digital currency is, so in the United States, the Federal Reserve controls our money supply under law. So some of you who have followed the burgeoning federal budget deficit or how our money supply works have probably noticed in the last decade or so, not only has our national debt skyrocketed, it's now nearly at $32 trillion, but also every time the federal government or the president or Congress wants to do more spending, basically, uh, the Federal Reserve prints more dollars. They also do this in certain economic crises, to like during the financial crisis in 2008. The Federal Reserve just prints more dollars, creates more dollars out of thin air, and that leads to and currently we see that leading to widespread inflation and also the debasement of our money supply because if there's more dollars in the economy, ceteris paribus, if nothing else has changed, then your labor, the value of goods, the relative value of things is lower in terms of that dollar. So a central bank digital currency is really a unique threat to American values and American freedoms. And what it is so like if you're familiar with Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin's a great example. The way that Bitcoin is set up is that there's only 21 million Bitcoin that can ever exist. So Bitcoin is an example of a currency, a digital currency that's a hard currency. It can't be debased, it can't be inflated. So the network that runs Bitcoin, that creates the Bitcoin network, can't just decide, oh, we're going to create another million Bitcoin just because we feel like it for whatever reason. So Bitcoin is a hard currency that that one Bitcoin today is going to be worth one Bitcoin tomorrow and 10 years from now and 100 years from now. Whereas with fiat currencies, with the way that governmental fiat currencies work, if a government or like our Federal Reserve decides to print more money, $1 today is going to probably be equal to $2 whenever inflation hits that point in the future. Um, so With a central bank digital currency, it's not a decentralized network like Bitcoin issuing the currency. It's a centralized bank, in this case, the Federal Reserve. Now, we have our Federal Reserve has been planning and working on the creation of a central bank digital currency for several years. Um, and this is actually also tied into a lot of concern with well, actually, from the Federal Reserve's point of view, probably a lot of interest in what is known as social credit scores. So, for instance, the Chinese government has a social credit system. If you have violated some laws or ticked off some government bureaucrat, that you have a social credit score that the government can use to restrict your activities, restrict your travel, restrict, you know, the things that you might ordinarily do in the course of being a citizen. So think about what would it would mean if the central bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, were to create and implement a central bank digital currency. So number one, that would mean the government has complete financial surveillance, the ability to completely financially surveil every American. If every American were to be forced to adopt and use a central bank digital currency, a digital dollar. So what could this mean? Well, it could mean the government can, with a click of a mouse button, freeze or seize your assets. We saw that this happened in Canada in the last year during the trucker protests. The Canadian government started freezing and seizing uh, uh, bank accounts tied to people protesting the Trudeau government's policies with very little due process. And this is kind of an example of how, you know, we're seeing these political imperatives begin getting implemented as social credit systems in other governments, not just China. So truckers in Canada did something that was politically unpalatable to the Trudeau government. Well, Trudeau government decides we're going to start seizing your assets and your money so that you can't pay gas or pay your bills or get food. And that was their means of quelling these protests. It was a very totalitarian project and very totalitarian idea. So this second and very related danger of a central bank digital currency is that the government could engage in what's called programmable spending. So this is when, let's say, instead of cash dollars in your pocket, all transactions in the United States are suddenly only allowed through the use of a Federal Reserve digital dollar, right? So because it's digital, because it's issued by the Federal Reserve, they could tie all kinds of stipulations to it. Like they could say you can't buy liquor, or you couldn't buy guns, or you couldn't buy a new Bitcoin miner, or you can't engage in certain disfavored political activities. We saw in the Obama administration the Operation Checkpoint, um, where they cracked down on politically disfavored industries using federal regulatory agencies. So, with a federal bank digital dollar implemented, those restrictions don't have to go through the ordinary mechanisms of government. Again, it could be a program tied to your digital dollar that you're spending, right? So suddenly your employer can only pay you in digital dollars. You'd have a electronic or digital wallet, but to spend that money, you would be restricted in. Uh, they could program into the entire financial system tied to that digital currency restrictions and how and where you can spend it. And it would be a way to cut off or curtail innovative or emerging technologies, industries, political movements, the like. It's just, you can kind of like pick up from this discussion that this is a significant and profound threat to our First Amendment activities. Should it be implemented? Another significant risk of a central bank digital currency is that it would allow the Federal Reserve to programmatically create negative interest rates. So this is a situation where, say, there's a depression, and the central bank decides we want people to start spending money instead of saving it. So we're going to offer all depository institutions, or anyone who's holding a digital dollar, digital currency, um, would, with a negative interest rate, you would lose money if you sat on it and you saved it. So you'd be paying borrowers interest instead of lenders, right? So this would be another financial tool for central banks to manipulate entire economies and promote, again, essentially political agendas. In the United States, we've seen a lot of conservative opposition to ESG governance mandates. That is environmental and social governance mandates, right? So, in Missouri, our former state treasurer Scott Fitzpatrick, and former Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt, who's now a U.S. Senator, those two guys really kind of began standing up to large investment firms like BlackRock and Vanguard, who are implementing economic and social governance policies in the funds that Missouri state government was investing pension money into. And this is one way in which political movements can co-opt entire governments and public institutions, is by putting together a political agenda that begins infiltrating and determining public policies, even in places where the constituents, the voters, are opposed to those specific policies. In this case, you see a lot of ESG governance mandates around critical race theory or its corollary, diversity, equity, inclusion programs, or you see ESG programs in areas where, like the climate change movement, which is politically controversial. There's no necessarily societal consensus on how to address or recognize climate change issues, but you have companies and institutions that are promoting a specific political agenda to address those issues through these environmental and social mandates. And because they have gotten to the point where, large, trillion-dollar equity funds and investment firms are using them in determining their investment decisions, are beginning to influence governmental policy. Again, this is a subversion of policy and politics in places where those constituents and voters don't agree necessarily with those mandates. Missouri is a great example because obviously Missouri, as a conservative state, we really have some different ideas, let's just say, and postures on some of these political movements I just mentioned. I want to also discuss another significant risk of a central bank digital currency. It's one I don't see talked about a lot, but a good friend of mine mentioned it to me the other night. I thought I'd bring it up when I did this video. So think about what it would mean for the federal government, for the Federal Reserve, to have complete financial surveillance through the implementation of a digital dollar, right? Every American has to use and spend this digital currency. It's all tracked. And the government would have the first access and the complete access to every transaction in the economy. That's a lot of data. That's a lot of information. But for your purpose, think about how public markets work, how stock market works, right? Imagine what it would mean for a government to have complete access, first access and complete access to every bit of market data in the entire economy. It would allow governments to front run the stock market and any other market that depends on, you know, uh, uh, efficient efficient information and its dissemination, right? The government knows, oh, people are spending money, shifting their discretionary income to this sector or that sector. Think about what that would mean for the bureaucrats and the third party or private sector companies that are have access to that information before the ordinary citizen or the markets have access to that information. That would allow governments to uh, play the futures market very well, right? If they have the complete information in real time of how people are spending their money and where spending decisions, and investment decisions are being made before anyone else. So that's another significant risk. Finally, the last significant risk I'll discuss, and there's many more concerns with central bank digital currencies, but the final risk I want to discuss is if you have a repository or real-time access to every bit of financial information in an entire economy, well, what's the risk? Who has access? Well, in the past, we've seen the Chinese and the Russians, our persistent foreign adversaries, try to hack, and sometimes in some cases have success in hacking our government databases. I recall a couple of years ago, the Federal Office of Personnel Management had a data breach, and hundreds of thousands of federal agents and federal employees, their informations were stolen by the Chinese. That's a huge national security risk. Imagine if the Federal Reserve had real-time, comprehensive, complete information about every financial transaction in the United States economy, and the Chinese develop quantum computing and quantum cryptography and hack that system and suddenly have access to the real-time financial information. In fact, complete financial histories of every American citizen. That's a profound and very dangerous scenario and risk. So, this language, this amendment that Senator Brattin put in Senate Bill 100 is a first step, a very good first step. It prevents any public entity in the state of Missouri from it prevents any Missouri public entity from mandating use of a digital currency. That's a great first step to preventing the adoption in Missouri, the forced adoption in Missouri of such a Federal Reserve digital currency, if and when the Federal Reserve decides to try to implement it. And obviously, there's a bunch of moving parts here, right? To implement a Federal Reserve digital currency, Congress would probably have to mandate it, but that doesn't mean the Federal Reserve couldn't, through regulatory backdoors, begin implementing such a currency, in small ways, and ultimately lead in 5 or 10 years to the complete governmental adoption of such a currency. In such a case, Missouri, as a sovereign state, as a co-equal government with the federal government, we are now beginning to have the tools to resist the imposition of such a totalitarian move. And hopefully, it's my hope that Missouri is one of the states that will begin leading the way for the other states to kind of examine this issue and say, hey, this is a significant risk. This is a totalitarian program. It completely undermines so many freedoms guaranteed to us in the Bill of Rights. It creates risks that we don't even know about in terms of how foreign adversaries could take advantage of the system. Um, and if Missouri can help begin building the movement at the state level to influence what our federal congressional delegations understand about these ideas and these proposed policies of the Federal Reserve, then hopefully we can, in the next few years, begin saying in Congress, hey, this is a bad idea. Let's stop the unlimited printing of money by our Federal Reserve. Let's not take any steps to the adoption of a governmental digital currency. Let's not force Americans to use one mode of transaction or another. Um, as long as we can maintain at least our current regulatory and uh, uh, what's the word? Um, you know, I probably disagree with some of the laws and statutes that govern how governments access and control uh, Americans' financial information. But and I think reasonable people can disagree on that. But we haven't reached a point where these policies have the potential or the capacity to really lead to outright totalitarianism. With a central bank digital currency, that's a certainty. So I'm very glad that Senators Bill Eigel and Rick Brattin have taken these steps to implement this law in Missouri. We hope the House of Representatives takes this bill up. We hope that maybe in the House an amendment gets added to add Bitcoin as a legal tender option alongside gold and silver in the state of Missouri. That would be fantastic. So, really hoping that that this was educational, that this gave some perspective on the recent action of the Missouri Senate, and I've included links to a Cato Institute paper. Again, I'm the lobbyist for Crypto World out of St. Charles, and I work generally with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency companies and interests in the state of Missouri. I'm also including a link to our new crypto pack. Should you feel free to reach out to me about how we're working to educate and advance good Bitcoin and blockchain and cryptocurrency policies. Um, and call your state representatives and senators and tell them to continue working towards financial privacy, financial freedom, and end the reckless debasement of our American dollars through reckless Federal Reserve policies. Thanks.